Tony Bettini is my name. I'm the MC today. We start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend our respect to all Indigenous Australians present today. And welcome to our hybrid meeting for those online and also to all of you in the room. Thanks today will be given by President-elect Philip Cornish. That'll be followed by the Loyal Toast by President Catherine. So in order to do a toast, we need to have our glasses charged, but wait to do that. Philip. Thank you. Progress, if that's a word, in a moment. When something cars I have turned out to be, Bloomberg Business published a possible timeline of the steps in adoption. Thought that in 2060 it was projected that people would be banned from driving their own vehicles. As I would be 99 years old by then, I may well be happy to hand in my life, but I'm not sure. The timelines will be wrong at 10 years. Technology will lead to all sorts of unforeseen consequences. I'm grateful for the wisdom to know how to steer, and let us be grateful for the possibilities of this and the role that we can play by discussion and action. And for that, I'm grateful.
Rotarians and guests, please be upstanding. To Australia and Rotary International. Please have a seat and we'll commence the main meeting at 1:10, and for those online, we'll put you into breakout rooms. Thank you. Members, visitors and guests, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to our 17th meeting of the Rotary year and our 5,054th meeting of all time. It's wonderful to see you all here today. Bit closer, and welcome to those online. I'd also like to say thank you to those wearing those very colourful hats, and that's all about mental health awareness, and we'll talk about that shortly. Our guests today are Dr. Katie Allen, Professorial Fellow at Murdoch Children's Research Institute, and Professor Colin McLeod, Executive Director of the Melbourne Entrepreneurial Centre for Research, Innovation and Commercialisation. Both will be more fully introduced by Karen Kim, our Chair of the Day. Please join me in welcoming our guests. Also here, host Suresh, one of our members, hello Suresh, in a very colourful hat. We have the Rotarian, Australian Rotary Health Scholar, Harry Demsey. Love the hat there, Harry. We'll be hearing from Harry shortly. Please, in the meantime, let's acknowledge Harry and Suresh. Now, I have a little bit of a long list of visitors and visiting Rotarians. So as I read your names out, if you could just stand, please, and then we'll do one round of applause at the end. So Anthony Austin, guest of John Saunders. Harry Dempsey, of course, guest of Suresh. Colin Newton, guest of Cheryl Lacey. If you could just stand up as I read your names. Sobel's Karen, guest of Karen Kim. Mark Eckel, guest of Karen Kim. Navjeet Singh, guest of Naya, and John Tickle, visitors of the club. We've also got some visiting Rotarians, Charles Allen from Sydney, AJ Yadav from Rotaract Kathmandu, Teresa Mitchell from Warragul, and Diana Abruzzi from Mount Macedon, and Kim Wen from Kew. So welcome everyone. So why are we wearing the colourful hats today? Apart from being a fashion statement, and I've got to say this was not planned, but lucky me for picking the pink today, Mental Health Month in October it's all about creating awareness of mental health research and efforts. ARH research helps 1 in 5 Australians affected by depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and many other illnesses. We wear our hats today to lift the lid on mental health. I call now on Suresh, who serves as chair of the District 9800 Australian Rotary Health Committee, to tell us more about mental health initiatives and also introduce our PhD scholar, Harry. Thank you.
President Catherine, fellow Rotarians, ladies and gentlemen. As President Catherine mentioned, 1 in every 5 Australians suffer from some form of mental illness during their lifetime. This is not a statistic that Australia can be proud of. The economic cost alone is estimated to be about $50 billion, a direct cost of $50 billion, and an indirect cost resulting in caregiving, lack of productivity, etc., is estimated to be about $130 billion. This too is a cost that Australia can ill afford, particularly in post-COVID recovery. As the President mentioned, Australia is World Mental Health Month, and the 10th of October every year is World Mental Health Day. Australian Rotary Health is the largest private funder of research into mental health, and in the 40 years of its existence has disbursed more than $2 million a year towards research into mental illness. For as little as $100, you too, as Rotarians, can be a part of that journey and be a friend or a companion of Australian Rotary Health and contribute towards mental health research. One such beneficiary of a research PhD scholarship is Harry Demsey. Harry is currently pursuing a PhD in biomedicine at the Florey Institute of Neuroscience and Mental Health, which is affiliated with the University of Melbourne. He previously studied a double degree in biomedicine and physics at Monash University and performed research into immunology at the Walter and Eliza Institute. Harry is proudly supported by Australian Rotary Health, the Rob Henry Memorial, and the Lawrence Laboratory. His PhD project is about using artificial intelligence to accelerate the preclinical trial of research into mental health medication. Without further ado, I have great pleasure in introducing Harry Demsey.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you about my PhD project, which is supported by, as Suresh said, supported by Australian Rotary Health, the Rob Henry Memorial, and the Lawrence Laboratory. As you all know, mental illnesses are widespread, affecting 25% of the population, with 300 million people affected by depression, anxiety, and PTSD. And the ripple effects these conditions have on individuals and the people around them has motivated biomedical research into ways to treat these conditions. Biomedical researchers aim to develop drugs that can treat people living with mental illness. And before we can test these drugs in humans living with mental illness, we first need to test these drugs in animals, such as mice, living with conditions that mimic human mental illnesses. And now I'm going to go into an example of a human mental illness, which is alcohol use disorder, and how it can be simulated in mice for research. So let's take some mice living with withdrawals from alcohol dependence after a lot of alcohol exposure over time. Researchers, may treat them with an experimental drug and then ask the mouse whether has this drug improved your withdrawals. But of course, mice can't talk, so we can't do this. So instead, what happens is we treat mice with an experimental drug, and we videotape mice running around an open field with and without a drug. And then researchers watch these videos and manually score the time spent doing withdrawal-associated behaviors like scratching and shaking. And then they compare the time spent scratching and shaking with and without a drug. And then from this data, you can conclude that whether the drug reduces scratching and shaking symptoms and recommend this drug for human trials. But there's a big bottleneck in this process, which is it's really time consuming to watch videos of mice and manually score behaviors. If you have like 40 hours of videos of mice, it's going to take you at least 40 hours to go through all those videos. And imagine what another member of the lab has to do. And now consider how many thousands of labs we have globally studying alcohol use disorder. You can just imagine the massive time loss there is globally. And if we could just take away this time loss, we would have so much more time for doing new experiments into the development of drugs for other mental health disorders. And that's what I want to do for my PhD project. I want to use AI to create a tool that can watch videos of mice and automatically classify the time spent performing behaviors. And this is not just important for alcohol use disorder research. This is equally valid for nicotine dependence research, if you see in the top left, opioid dependence research. And if you study different behaviors to scratching and shaking, you can all, like such as grooming and huddling, you can also study mouse models of anxiety and depression. So this just shows that what I'm working on is will hopefully speed up the preclinical research into almost all mental health research. Almost all mental health research. But I not only want to make a tool that can just score grooming and huddling or a small number of behaviors, I want it to classify as many behaviors as possible. So if you have a video of a mouse and you can really extract many, many different behaviors. And within each of these behaviors, you can get subtypes like scratching with the nose, scratching with the hind legs, scratching fast or slow, etc. And I want to make an AI tool that can extract all of this behavioral data at once. And this is important because let's just say you have a mouse model of alcohol use disorder, and you want to work out whether this drug reduces withdrawal-like symptoms like scratching and shaking. It might show that this drug reduces scratching and shaking, but what if it causes excessive grooming, which could be related to some other kind of adverse event, which we would only then discover if we did human trials? What if it caused excessive rearing, which you'd only discover later as some kind of like hyperactivity, symptom in humans? So that's the importance of creating a tool that can classify all different types of mouse behavior simultaneously. And it's also really tedious to classify all these different types of behavior as a human. So in summary, I want to go from create an artificial intelligence tool that can go from a video of a mouse to a video of a mouse with all the behavioral classification data, so that this can speed up mental health research and provide detailed data about how drugs influence mouse behavior, which will then open a window into how these drugs may treat humans with mental health disorders. And I'm extremely grateful to Australian Rotary Health for allowing me to pursue my passion, which is this PhD project. Thank you.
Well done, Harry. That's certainly going to make a big difference, I think. And there are, I'm sure, plenty of analysts in labs who will be thankful to you as well. Just a few notices before our guest speakers come up. So just a reminder of Paul Harris Breakfast, the 32nd annual Rotary Central Melbourne Paul Harris Breakfast is on Tuesday, the 12th of November at the RACV Club. This year features guest speaker Chris Anstey with Tall Tales, What the Whiteboard Never Taught Me. Chris is an elite performance coach with a 17-year sporting career with the NBA, with Dallas Mavericks and Chicago Bulls, Russia, Spain, and two-time Olympian and world champion. Our club normally has really good representation, so keep your eyes peeled in the next bulletin, where there'll be a link so that you can consider joining. We will be having a table, so just make sure that you're considering that when you're booking. A big thank you to those involved with the Melbourne Marathon. Congratulations to all involved. The Smith Family Project fundraising team, we've got 20 volunteers, and we were quite popular, obviously, because we were the last refreshment station at the end of the run. And all of those proceeds are going to the Smith Family Project. Also, a reminder, the Smith Family Raffle, so tickets are still on sale. The main prize is $2,000 voucher to Collingwood Bike Shop to spend any way you like. So tickets are $5 each or $45 for 10, and they're available on your way out today. All right, I'd now like to invite Karen Kim to the podium to introduce our guest speakers. Over to you, Karen.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is now my absolute honour and pleasure to be welcoming our widely respected and inspiring guests, Dr. Katie Allen and Professor Colin McLeod. Dr. Katie Allen is a distinguished leader with extensive experience in medical research, innovation and public service. I'm sure you recognise her. She served as a member for Higgins in the Australian Parliament and has held leadership roles across research institutions and boards in the education and health sectors. A paediatrician for 28 years, Katie is internationally recognised for her pioneering work in food allergy research, including the Health Nuts cohort study and the Vitality trial. She has published over 400 scientific articles, very impressive, and has made significant contributions to national and global health initiatives. And Professor Colin McLeod is the Executive Director of the Melbourne Entrepreneurial Centre and a Professor at the University of Melbourne's Business School. He leads initiatives that support researchers, students and entrepreneurs in creating impactful ventures. Colin has been instrumental in 12 new ventures that have collectively raised over, wait for it, $90 million. With a BA, MBA and PhD from University of Melbourne, his expertise spans technology, commercialisation and partnership building, and has held academic positions at prestigious institutions like UC Berkeley and Cambridge. Please make them feel very warmly welcome.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and I'm delighted to be here for the third time at Melbourne Rotary, having given speeches about the Health Nuts study, actually. And so I won't talk about Health Nuts today because today is about how we can improve the prosperity of the country. And I think Rotarians, love to talk about business and how you can be practical and make a difference. I will mention that I'm a Paul Harris International Fellow for my sins. I was given one because of work that I did innovating in liver cell transplantation, which is a project that was supported by Rotary in the early 2000s. But when asked to talk today, there is such a big set of topics that I could talk about, and I know Colin and I could cover so many different areas. So I asked my husband, Malcolm, who's here with us today, how should I start my speech? And he said, it's always so much more interesting to hear about a story. So before I blast you with facts, which scientists are known to want to do, let's just start with a story. So I'm sorry this is a bit blurry. It's a bit of an old photo. I dug it off an archive from the internet, but in the top corner there is a man named Jeff. And this photo was taken about 40 years ago. And Jeff was a man who had some symptoms that he couldn't work out what was going on. He lived in Tasmania, was a boarding house master, rowing captain, and also the priest at Hutchins Boarding School. And Jeff had tiredness for about 10 years. And he came from a very long history of medical people in his family. His father was a doctor, his brother was a doctor, his niece was a medical student, and no one could work out what was going on. He felt very tired, and the family suspected maybe he drank too much, and that was what made him feel a bit tired. His liver function tests seemed to become a bit abnormal. No one could work out what was going on. He needed to have an afternoon nap every day. I'm sure there's plenty of people in this room who sort of wondered maybe that's them. He then turned a funny colour and he became quite bronzed, and his liver started to fail and he developed diabetes. And that was when the penny dropped, that he actually had something called hemochromatosis, which is a hereditary condition that can occur in about 1 in 200 people in Australia. And it's where the iron in the body accumulates and basically rusts the organ in the body. And if it's picked up too late, unfortunately, you can develop liver failure and die. And that is exactly what happened to Jeff at the age of 52. Jeff was my uncle. And watching him go through that experience launched a keen interest in what we could have done differently and how we could have picked this condition up earlier. Because the good news about having the risk of a condition like hemochromatosis is that if you are identified early enough and give blood, then you will never get the disease. So it's a completely preventable disease. And a couple of years after Jeff died, the gene became available. So the gene was discovered, and as the commonest gene in the Caucasian population, it is the poster child, potentially, for population-wide genetic screening. So I'm going to take you through a bit of a tour of how I tried to get population-wide genetic screening for hemochromatosis off the ground. But I'm going to give you the line to finish the line first, and that is, we failed until last year. So this has been a 25-year journey, and it has taken so many different routes along the way and has picked up so many of my interests. It's only one of my research interests. The other one was food allergy. But when I became a member of parliament, I was actually the parliamentary friends of hemochromatosis. And we also managed to get some new policy changes, which I'm very proud of, relating to genetic screening. And I'm now back at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, and I'm very proud of the fact that I've managed to help spin out a company for population genetic screening that looks at all sorts of conditions. So I don't have long, because I don't want to take up all of Colin's speaking time, but I'm going to take you through, particularly for those who are nerdy in the room, some of the technical sides of trying to get population screening off the ground. So I'll use the word HH because hemochromatosis is a bit of a mouthful, but it's common. 1 in 200 risk of this disease. It's cheap. You can just do a genetic test by cheek swab for about $1. And if you give blood as someone who's at risk of this disease, your iron levels go down and you don't rust. So it has double good. Not only are you being treated, but the blood can be used by the blood bank. But people were really worried about this at the turn of the century. If we do genetic screening, you're going to cause all sorts of concerns in the community. I got so many lectures from doctors and scientists and policymakers. People will be discriminated based on their genetics. Not everyone who has the genes definitely gets the disease. Now, we've been through COVID. We all understand that you might be COVID positive and you may not have symptoms. The world's moved on with regards to understanding medicine and health, and we understand that not every disease causes the same symptoms and not every gene causes the same disease. But there was concern that we'd have people who have the genes who were never going to get the disease. And there's also health economic considerations, because if you screen a whole population, even at $1 a pop, that's still millions and millions of dollars. So we launched a pilot population-based genetic screening program, which took about 10 years, and we screened 11,000 people in the workplace. And then we did a bigger study where we screened 40,000 people in a biobank, and we published hundreds of papers. And it took millions of dollars to do these grants and lots of late nights getting these papers written. So what did we learn? We learned that genetic screening is acceptable to the public. They're not as dim as scientists think. Consent is informed. People can understand what it is that is going to happen. And we do know that if they have these genes, that they do take the steps to give blood and keep themselves healthy. We found out participants were not anxious. We solved some of the genetic insurance issues, which was a bit of policy work that I did behind the scenes. And we also found that social discrimination or employer discrimination wasn't going to be problematic. In fact, we found the insurance companies wanted to test for the genes, because if you got the gene test, were found to have the gene, and then gave blood, you were going to be healthier. So it was a great outcome for insurance. And we also discovered that worried wills in those who had 2 copies of the gene were not created. But we still didn't seem to be able to get a company to get behind us with the testing. We did try AMRAD in the early 2000s. We couldn't find a company to look at this testing because you can't patent genes. So if you don't have a patent, how do you commercialise? So we thought, let's go to government instead. So we pitched it to the Minister for Health, Tony Abbott, at the time, and he said, it's a state issue. Very unhelpful. So then we pitched it to the Assistant Minister for Health 4 years later, Fiona Nash, and she said, make the blood bank do it, because the blood bank is the natural owner of this condition. So we have finally pitched it to Lifeblood over many years. They're very slow at responding. They've managed to get themselves $30 million for funding for screening for iron levels, and now we're in negotiations for adding in gene testing. So we've got there 25 years later, but it's been a slow process. So the question then is, why is genetic screening at a general population not happening? And we all know about the Human Genome Project, and in 2000, everyone talked about this great revolution of genomics, that we're going to be able screen everyone like Gattaca and work out, you know, where you're going to be highly intelligent or where you're going to be able to run faster than Usain Bolt. And it hasn't really worked out in the way we thought it would work out 25 years later. And that's because it's more complicated than we understand. And Colin and I were speaking before, in medtech or in innovation, about 90% of projects fail and only about 10% get through. And that's why in the US and places like Israel, there's a very, very positive ecosystem, understanding that in order to have a winner, you have to have a lot of horses in the race. Now, personally, I think genetic screening is a good horse and should win the race. But the biggest question is who pays for it? So I won't really talk about this too much, but just to say that the costs are plummeting, the community's getting behind it, and the regulatory environment is starting to stabilise. And this is a very complicated slide, but what I wanted to mention here is there's lots of different ways that we think genetic screening will come to the community. It could come through newborn screening at the time of birth. It can happen in response to infectious diseases. So, for instance, say we get another pandemic, and just imagine we screen you for a gene that shows whether or not you're likely to die from the next virus that comes through. I mean, how many people know someone who got COVID and didn't even have symptoms? We think that's probably a genetic basis for the way people are responding to different infectious diseases. There's reproductive genetic screening, which is already being paid for by the government, so you can work out whether your child is going to have a severe disability. There's things called pharmacogenomics, where you can work out whether you're going to have a bad reaction to, say, Losec, one of the proton pump inhibitors, or which antidepressant is right for you. But there's also a whole lot of other screening that's coming online, which is going to be more about precise genetic screening that gets people the healthcare that they need at the right time and at the right place. And we think that it's going to move from reproductive screening and single gene screening, which is at the moment costing the government and users thousands of dollars, to more like polygenic risk scores, where we say you've got a risk of having a cardiovascular health outcome that's adverse, to one day being whole of genome, where we can look at everyone's genome for less than $100. And once it drops to about $100, we think it's going to be much more affordable for government and private providers to pay. I was very proud to be part of the Zimmerman report when I was in Parliament, where we recognised the emergence of precision health and that there should be a jointly funded national genomics testing program. And the government has provided significant funding over a number of years to build the ecosystem to enable genetic screening to come online. So there's a bottom-up approach from researchers finding genes and discovering what ways to better test people, but there's got to also be a top-down approach where government's providing the ecosystem for innovation and for companies to prosper. So we know that Australia has good research commercialisation, but we could do better. Australian R&D expenditure is only 1.8% of expenditure. It's well below the OECD average of 2.4%. We know we have good collaboration, but it could be better between businesses and universities. It's only 6.5% versus the OECD average of 13%. So we do have an emerging ecosystem, and I know Colin's going to talk about some of the fantastic programs that are being funded by state and federal governments, but we have a long way to go. We're very strong in the medical research sector. Colin and I are both in that area, and in fact, I call Parkville Precinct the Silicon Valley of medical research, with more than 3,000 medical researchers in the precinct. We're very good at emerging renewable energy and agriculture, but we need to leverage some of these strengths and have more of a strategic intelligence approach. I personally think we need to be better at helping grant funding for NHMRC, which is the National Health and Medical Research Council, and ARC have a framework that evaluates grant proposals based on their commercialisation potential, a commercialisation performance index, as you might say. I think we need to do better with tax incentives and grants for university industry collaborators. We know countries with the highest innovative sectors like Israel, South Korea, Sweden, all have fantastic government policies that incentivise often offshore investors into local companies to help them become globally competitive. I think we need to reform some of the IP laws for smoother technology transfer. It's so hard for small and medium-sized enterprises to get into this area because it's hard for them to launch their IP correctly. And I do think we need a national innovation strategy, because at the end of the day, our productivity comes from the animal spirit of the individual who's putting their hand up to try and solve a problem, develop a commercial product, and make a difference, whether it's in a commercial sense or in a public health sense. There are a lot of people out there who want to make a difference, but don't have the will or the know-how to get there. We're doing better with education, we're doing better with collaboration, but we need to do better in innovation. As Joe Lonsdale has said, wealth is only ever created actually from the bottom up, with free people employing their distinctly human creativity and finding ways to serve and employ others. Thank you.
Oh, well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much, Catherine and Karen, for the opportunity to come and speak today. This is one of my favourite, this is what I spend my life doing, talking about research commercialisation. I actually have to go and give a 1.5 hour presentation tomorrow on this topic. I could give a 1.5 day presentation, a 1.5 minute presentation, like pick your poison. My apologies for being a bit husky. I've actually just come from 4 hours of lecturing. So it's the last week of the university semester, so it's a pretty trying time. It's funny, Katie started with a story, and my interest in commercialisation actually starts with a story. I got my Footscray. My dad was a factory worker. He was a very fit guy, played sport his entire life. I was like a regular kid. I liked playing footy, I liked playing cricket. The only thing that was a bit unusual about me is I actually liked going to school, which was a bit unusual when you're 12 years old. And then just after my 12th birthday, and this is the time when many people here will remember, back in the 60s, we had the space race. We just about eliminated polio and smallpox and diseases, tuberculosis. We had a whole lot of computers were appearing for the first time. Colour TVs were emerging for the first time. And every night on the TV, you'd hear about some new breakthrough in medical technology or space technology or something. I can see a few people nodding your head. Some of you are as old as me can remember Eric Pearce telling us the truth of the world at 6 o'clock every night on Channel 9. And then just after my 12th birthday, my father died. He was 41 years of age. And that didn't, the emotional impact is obviously quite significant, but it made no sense to me. We can send people to the moon and we have people dying. How does that work out? We can eliminate diseases and we have people dying of, my father died of lung cancer, never a smoker, super fit, 41 years of age. That didn't make any sense to me. Anyway, 30 years later, I did a PhD in commercialising technology, and all of a sudden it did start to make sense. When you're a kid, you think, well, why is anything a problem? Why can't scientists just fix this? Why can't they fix the roads? Why can't they fix eliminate disease? And as I got older, I just realised how difficult it was. And so I thought I'd just talk a bit today about some of the challenges. I have chosen medtech as the sort of vehicle for talking about it, but I will say I'm not a medical person. I get to hang around with a lot of brilliant medical people. Any complex technical questions, straight to Katie, or now that I've seen Harry's presentation, straight to Harry on technical questions. So why is commercialisation difficult? And I think you always need a few stats you can go home and tell people. I learned a lot at lunch, so I thought I'd give you a few stats to go back and dazzle the office with. But if you're Katie or Harry, this is the raw material you're working with. Now, you don't want to think about this too much while you're having lunch. But you've got 37 trillion cells in your body. Anyone here imagine what a trillion is? 10 to 20,000 proteins in each one. 80 billion kilometres of DNA inside each body in this room. 100,000 kilometres of blood vessels. So that's the raw material that medical researchers have to work with. The human body is an extraordinary thing, but it's hard and it's complex. And as Katie said, it's taken them 25 years, and not always about the science, sometimes about the commercialisation process. I always think it's important when you give people some statistics about the human body, You've actually got to give them something yucky to take home and tell their kids and grandkids about. So this is my contribution to that. Maybe that one. Your body, the top layer of your skin regenerates every 27 days. So collectively between us, we're going to make a new person within the next 48 hours. If you end up on a long train ride between Flinders Street Station and Pakenham, it's a full train, collectively you'll make a whole new body by the time you get to Pakenham. So if there's someone with a bit of dandruff on their shoulders, that's the least of your worries. Right, as you sit there now, people are regenerating their skin. So you can go home and tell your grandkids and your kids about that. But it's difficult. You know, the human body is an amazing organism. One of the issues we deal with at universities is this concept known as the burden of knowledge. My son is a medical student. My younger son's a medical student. What he learns about medicine, probably 90% of what he learns about medicine has been discovered in the last 6 years. What we know changes that quickly. Millions of new publications. Now we're all through COVID. We're all experts now on genetic variants and how diseases and infections morph and change and what have you. And there are over 40,000 registered clinical trials. That's the process by which you get drugs approved for human use. As Katie, as we were talking earlier, out of that 400,000, about 90% will fail. Most things fail. Some because the drug doesn't work, some because the control has worked. So being a deep tech person and being a deep tech researcher is just inherently awfully hard. Katie mentioned about the venture capital community. So this is what Australia looks like in terms of venture capital. We don't have a very significant venture capital community. I would only be guessing, but I'm guessing if a drug came at the end of Harry's research, it's probably going to take somewhere between 80 and 150 million dollars to commercialise that drug, to actually get at the stage where it's capable of being produced. Now, so we have 0.3% of our GDP, and Katie mentioned countries like the United States and Israel. I suspect this may be a bit of a rhetorical question. Is there anyone here who's never heard of ChatGPT? ChatGPT is owned by a company called OpenAI. 2 weeks ago, they announced one investment of $6 billion. One investment for one company. 50% more than the entire value of the Australian venture capital community. So we just don't have the money here to do it. So that presents a whole lot of challenges. You know, the work that Katie's doing. So I should just maybe go back a sec. If you're a university, in Katie's case, she's running a spin out. So a spin out is taking the intellectual property out of the university and putting it into a venture and actually using that venture to commercialise the intellectual property. What Australian universities have done since Australian universities started is develop intellectual property and sell the intellectual property. Well, we license it out. Now, that's probably no different to, when I can remember when I was a kid at school and people used to say to me, we can't just keep dragging minerals out of the earth and selling them overseas. 50 years later, that's exactly what we're still doing. We're still dragging farming, agricultural products out of the earth and sending them overseas without any value added. And in universities, we were doing the same thing. We create intellectual property and we send it overseas. Now, we get revenue out of it. That's a nice thing, but all the jobs go with it. And there's a rule of thumb that for every job created in the spin out or startup, there are 7 additional jobs created in the supply chain, created in support services, accounting, legal, and what have you. So spin outs and actually commercialising the technology in Australia is a driver of economic growth. It's job creation, social welfare, and all those sorts of things. So it's a big issue for us as a country. Otherwise, we're going to end up with an economy in 100 years' time that looks like the economy we've got now, which looks like the economy for 100 years ago. There's a group at Harvard which talk about economic complexity. And as many of you know, Australia has been the envy of the world because we had 30 years of continuous economic growth, us and India, the only 2 countries in the world. But they have this model of economic complexity, and they say Australia's heading for a cliff because we don't do a lot of value adding to our major exports in agriculture and mining. So unless we start creating new companies and new industries built around new technologies, then all the jobs that we're hoping our kids will have in the future won't exist. So technology is a really important driver of economic growth. Oops. Sorry, I've pressed the wrong button. So,
What do we need to do to get better at commercialisation? As Karen said when she introduced me, I've worked at Berkeley, I've worked at Cambridge. A lot of people at the university are connected to leading universities around the world who are really good at this stuff. And this is what they tell us. We go and talk to them regularly. You've got to make strategic investments. And the two biggest investments are in venture funds and talent. One of the challenges for Australia, I mean, if I went to Boston and spoke to someone at Harvard or at MIT, they will tell you exactly what Katie just told you. Melbourne is regarded as one of the great medical research centres in the world, but all the value goes overseas. So we need to develop the financial infrastructure, the technical infrastructure. Simply getting product built to do clinical trials and all that sort of thing is hard. And the talent infrastructure. So, we all hear about the big SaaS companies, Canva and CultureAmp and what have you. We don't have many Australians who have actually taken a piece of intellectual property built around deep tech in Australia and taken it overseas and made it globally successful. In fact, if we were a room full of vice chancellors of universities from the 31 universities across Australia, we could probably name 3 people who have done it. So to actually find and nurture and create the talent to do it is a big challenge. The culture shift, I would just say, being a professor at a leading university is a pretty good job. You're well paid, you get tenure, you get research grants, you get PhD students, you get admired by your peers, you get to get known, it's not like being Taylor Swift or something, but you get to be quite well known internationally and so on. Why would you risk all that to go and work on a spin out for 3 or 4 years? And they're the sorts of questions that we're all wrestling with as research centres. It's probably no different to all the research centres down the Royal Parade. So the culture shift, how do we actually encourage people to say, okay, what you've been doing is fine, but we want you to take a risk with your entire career and take it in a new direction. The network expansion, mentors, advisors and nurses. One of the most interesting things that's happened to me at Melbourne Uni is we started reaching out to our alumni who are good at this stuff and said, can you help us, particularly people in the US and the UK? We now have 250 alumni and their own network who are mentors. We've never had anyone say no. People would really like to succeed, and also collaboration. My PhD is actually on how people collaborate to take technology to market, and nobody, whether you're Microsoft or NVIDIA or whoever, no one gets to market without being successful at collaboration. This is a whole new skill set that we don't really have in Australia. So this is a very busy slide. This is sort of slightly embarrassing because this is what you have to go through to take a piece of IP out of a university and into the world out there. Now, there's the classic, all the things that Katie's been through, intellectual property rights, working with business development, trying to identify a market and all those sorts of things. Because the IP, in most cases, is owned by the university. So, the researchers are employees of the university, we own the IP. They say, we'd like to start a company to commercialise this, so we've got to license the IP they've developed to them in their new company, how you work all that out, how you provide funding for it and what have you. But the 3 things that we've done over the last couple of years is, firstly, we've actually got people whose job it is to create new companies. That's a bit of a first for Australian universities. Like, your job is to find high potential intellectual property in the university, find academics who are willing to work out what to be honest, we probably don't want academics to be CEOs. They're great academics, not trained to be CEOs, and we will build the company around them. And we've got people whose job that is. We run a whole lot of training programs. So these fall under me. We have these 2 great acronyms. One's called MAP, the Melbourne Accelerator Program. The other one's called TRAM, Translating Research at Melbourne. They are great internal acronyms. They are the 2 worst Google search terms of all time. If you live in Melbourne, Google MAP and TRAM, you get the Stop 21 outside the University of Melbourne. But basically, those programs, the TRAM programs exist to train researchers about entrepreneurship and have them understand what opportunities are available around entrepreneurship. I'm a great believer in you choose X in preference to Y, not in ignorance of it. So if you don't want to be an entrepreneur, that's fine, but at least understand what it's about. First year we ran that program, we had 18 people go through it. This year we'll have over 500. So we're sort of getting out there and what have you. But the biggest thing we did is probably this. We actually started our own venture capital funds. So we were the first university in Australia to have its own venture capital funds. They're not huge funds. Between them, they've got about $125 million. In the world of deep tech, that's like pocket change. But it's enough to get the intellectual property out of the university and have the resources to get it into a shape inside a venture where it's attractive to more traditional venture capital funds. You know, people can write checks for $5 and $10 million. You know, we're writing checks for 500,000 and up to $5 million. So they've been the big breakthroughs for us. But the thing I would stress is this is a new game for us. Now, we've been good at licensing for a long, long time. We're pretty good at it. We know how it works. All of a sudden, when you start saying we're going to create spin-out companies, so when you license, here's a license, send money. When you spin out a company, you say, here's the intellectual property and send back the capital gain in 10 years' time or 15 years' time or 20 years' time, and we'll bear a lot of the risk of the development, we'll bear the risk of finding the right team and all those sorts of things. So it's a big shift for universities to go from here's a very conservative model of income generation to here's a very high risk but potentially high payoff model. So, but every now and then you see some green shoots. And this is a company called Porous Lane. They've developed this technology. You can make footpaths out of this. And basically it has all the properties of cement from a construction perspective, but water goes through it. So what that means is when it rains, the water doesn't run off out in the Port Phillip Bay, it actually goes into the water table. And it, you know, waters plants and it goes into reservoirs and all those sorts of things. So the things like drought should have less impact on Australia. But this guy who's hidden behind it, it's on there, Marty Stefani, Marty told me this is a quote from Marty literally 3 days ago. It's a pretty good job being a professor at a leading university. I could have just kept on doing what I've always done. But the support available at Melbourne gave me the courage to face the risks of trying something completely different. And that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to give people the courage to take the risks to try to do something different. Big challenge, still learning how to do it, but we are making some progress. So thank you.
Now we have the opportunity for you to ask the burning questions of Katie and Professor. Would you like to come and sit up here, Katie? And yeah, Berkeley just and Tony will talk about it.
Thank you. Hello, Katie. Karen Sobels. Katie, I was really interested in the point that you made about where you went to try and get support in state versus federal. 2 years ago, I had a grandson born with a genetic disorder. Had he been born in Melbourne, he would have died in 9 months. He was born in Canberra, where they did screening in the first 10 days, and today is a healthy 2.5-year-old child. How do we make sure that states come into alignment with great research and federal direction? I just don't understand how Australia can be so broken up like that.
Thank you. That's an excellent question, Karen. In fact, what you're really sort of speaking about is this whole divide, both health and education, between state and federal. And for someone navigating it, whether it's in health or education, you do find it's like divorced parents. So I like to say that the strength of our federal system is that if there's innovation in a state, then other states can learn quickly from that. But the problem is if the national doesn't get on board and make it national, then that's a problem. I will say in Australia, our medical research fraternity is incredibly well networked, and so they speak to each other all the time and speak internationally as well. And that's something that through COVID, we stood up a national committee on COVID, and that's why Australia's response, don't listen to anyone telling you this otherwise, was the best in the world other than Iceland. And that was because there were 68 professors every week meeting 3 times a week. I actually organised a committee, so I'm going to take a little bit of credit for that, who basically surmised all the data that went straight to the Chief Medical Officer and the Health Minister. And the response by Australia to COVID was very evidence-based and research-informed. Doesn't mean we always got it right, but we actually did have the best response, and it's been published by other independent observers that the Australia response to COVID from a health perspective was the second best in the world after Iceland. Now, as to how we can solve this problem between health and state, it's actually true for our whole healthcare system. GPs are funded by the federals, hospitals are funded by the state, medical research by the federals, you get education by the state. So it is very messy. The most important thing, I suppose, is the players in the field themselves are really wanting to collaborate and work better together. And when I was in Canberra, I was constantly getting people coming and saying, this is a great idea. Can you champion this for us? And I was actually, because I knew what they were doing, I knew what they were asking, I was able to champion. And so that would suggest that we encourage politicians like Karen, you yourself have a great background in business. People who have real life experience coming into Parliament to inform the politicians about how to deal with stuff that's coming at speed. And there are a lot of people in the science sector who used to come and see me and say, how can I get through the system more easily? And I now do it now that I'm outside Parliament. If anyone wants to ask, how do we navigate the political process to get our outcomes? I'm always happy to provide advice. It doesn't mean you'll win, but I can help sort of position you to do better, because at the end of the day, we all want our taxpayers' money to be better spent into the community.
G'day, my name's Rod Lewis. I've been the first time I've been here, and thank you for whoever it was that invited me. I've got a couple of small ventures, jealous of the amount of money you've raised. We're involved with 3 universities, and our experience is the university is fantastic at helping create and develop people to create IP and the academic stuff. And the students, it's not so good at actually commercialising it. And so I'm concerned about how that's going to be overseen and managed. I mean, the point about get a real person into Canberra to talk some sense, or forgive my bias, into the politicians. I think the academics may need some assistance in that way.
Oh, sorry, there's only one mic.
100% right. I mean, the role of, we have what's called a technology transfer office, and even though I spent a number of years working at Berkeley, since I left Berkeley, my closest association in the US is with Stanford, and their Office of Technology Licensing would say that for many years their job was basically to put a toll on intellectual property as it left the building. That was it, and so it was a model that was very successful for them. And I think what we're finding now is we're saying, okay, if you go, if you look at that chart I put up before, what are all the points of friction in that chart, and who needs to be involved in fixing that, and who shepherds the fair? So that's the sort of work we're doing around venture creators. But we employed our first venture creators 18 months ago, so they're still learning how to do it. I think the other thing is that I think, to be honest about it, the issue that most universities have is the IP we don't see. Where it's in a lab somewhere or on a computer somewhere, and the academics think, like, this is all too hard. I'll just keep on publishing papers and what have you. And so looking at through the application of AI technology to go through grant research and all those sorts of things, and look at complementary technologies. And the reality is, even at the big universities, the most successful universities like Harvard, MIT, et cetera, they'll all talk about shots on goal are important. Like, you need to have lots of people doing this stuff, but the winners tend to be the usual suspects. And we don't yet know who our usual suspects are. So that's why I say this is still a craft that we're in the process of developing. We sort of check in with our advisors overseas, and they sort of say, yeah, okay, keep going, do a bit of this and do a bit of that, but you're sort of going in the right direction. But we're probably 5 years away from having it right.
Something very special for you. I certainly measured your feet on the way in, and I have the 200% Australian made up in Preston from Wilderness Wear, Bill Industries company, and these are 100% Australian made socks. Oh, yes. So Katie, this is your size. I've measured it up and
Right on time. In closing, I'd like to thank our very special guests and visitors for attending today. I'm sure you all enjoyed our guest presenters. Yes, I think it's a wonderful topic, and I think we should explore this further. Catherine, if you could allow us to explore this maybe with another series. Thanks also to our wonderful MC, Tony Battani, for his reflection and Philip Cornish and the lunch setup and reception teams for their weekly effort in making all this possible. We come here every week, FYI. Please, if you can stay back a few minutes to assist, would be greatly appreciative. Now, if we could all stand and sing the national anthem, led by Katie and Colin.